everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're joining us today because I am so excited about my guest. And her name is Paula Mathieu. Mathieu. Yeah, it's Mathieu. I don't know why I wanted to make it all fancy and French and all this. It is a French. It looks French.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. But I do know Paula. Paula and I are connected through 4C's Conference on College Composition and Communication. And that's where we met, right, Paula? What, golly, must have been 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago.
3 or 4 years ago, maybe. And but let me tell you a little bit about Paula. She's a writer and a teacher. She works at Boston College, where she is associate professor of English and director of first-year writing. She teaches courses in writing as social action, first-year writing, mindful storytelling, creative nonfiction, and rhetoric. She wrote Tactics of Hope, The Public Turn in English Composition, and co-edited 3 essay collections, including Circulating Communities, The Tactics and Strategies of Community Publishing, co-edited by Tiffany, Rousculp, and Steve Parks. With Diana George, she writes about rhetorical powers of the dissident press. Wow, that's interesting. I'd like to read that. Read your work on that. That's amazing. And she also writes about intersections between writing and contemplative practice. Welcome, Paula. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, you are the most excited anyone's been to see me in months. So thank you for such a warm welcome. That is so lovely. Thank you.
I'm just so glad to be able to hang out with you for a little bit this afternoon.
Me too. Me too.
It's nice to have these variations in our routines, huh?
Yeah, or all the days seem alike. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, our conversation, I'll never forget when I met you. I think we were at our, I know that we were at, when we actually talked face to face and we were having a conversation, was in that contemplative pedagogy group, that special interest group. And I was just in awe of all the things that you had done, your engagement with contemplative mind and society, the group with that in higher ed, and all the work that you've done with that has just been just awe-inspiring for me. I want to hear, though, what I don't know is I want to hear where you started your practice. Where did your relationship with mindfulness begin? That's what I want to know.
From deep dysfunction, probably.
Here's to deep dysfunction.
I think, I definitely, there were a lot of different paths that intersected kind of at the same time. I think one is a writing project I'm doing of creative nonfiction related to my own family. And I grew up Catholic and the youngest of 9 children in suburb of Chicago. And we were a family that didn't talk about anything. Things weren't talked about. And there was a lot of silence and a lot of secrets and unknown things. And for a curious kid, I would always try to make up stories that made sense of why things were the way they were. And so I had a very sort of active mind that told a lot of stories that weren't always true because I had very insufficient information. So why was my family the way it was? And then we had a lot of tragedies and traumas in my family. I lost some family members very suddenly. My dad died when I was 15 and we never talked about it. And so there was a lot of loss that just never got talked about. And so I started a few years ago on this writing project because I realized that I believed stories that I didn't even know I believed, right? That I had these unspoken stories. So I had this kind of traumatic moment where I realized that I believed that my life would be short and tragic like a lot of other members of my family. But up until that moment, I had been utterly unaware that I'd been carrying around this story. And so it really shook me as, wow, I've got some work to do. And then my husband had long been, there's a Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm in Boston now. There's a Zen center, and he had long been a member of the Cambridge Zen Center. And so we both had this interest. I had always had sort of an interest in some Eastern philosophy, kind of in a dabbling. But I remember the first book that really made me see that what I was doing needed to change was reading some work by Eckhart Tolle and about all the stories in our minds. And there's one line, he says, "What a relief to know that life is seldom as dire as the story in my head makes it out to be." And that was kind of a really huge aha moment for me, where I realized that my biggest challenge through many things in my life, and I know that's a great privilege to be able to say this, were the stories I was telling in my head. That, I had been through a lot of difficult things, but what was worse is the stories I had created around them, that either had I done things differently, things might have come out. So either that I had some power in a situation where I was totally powerless, so realizing that a lot of the stories that got me through my childhood were really dysfunctional for me in my life right now. And so my interest in contemplative work really came out of my own personal life, needing to do this kind of excavating of and it really surprised me to realize you could believe things without knowing you believe them, right? Like that story that, I somehow thought I would live a very short life and die very tragically and dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
If you had asked me, I would have said, no, I don't believe that. But then when certain things would happen, certain kind of anxiety that I had, my body believed that, right? There was this deep story inside me that I believed that I wasn't even consciously aware of. Wow. So I think that's sort of the personal way I got into it. And then I started teaching at Boston College. September 11th, 2001 was my second day on the job.
Wow. I was going to say, how did you remember? But then, wow.
So that was it was my second teaching day. And I was with my first year writing students when the Twin Towers fell, and we watched it together, and it was sort of a very shared moment. And it was a very tough semester. And I think I ended up having sort of some trauma about that, and about students, and about, am I a good enough teacher? I was a brand new assistant professor. And so I ended up realizing that a lot of this work I was doing contemplatively, I needed to do both for myself as a teacher, but then more and more as I work with my students, seeing that, especially with writing students, I felt like I was never dealing with what their real stories were. That students come in and they all look, at Boston College, they all look very ready. They all look super professional. They all look like they know what they're doing. They look confident. They look competent, and they're very smart. But deep down inside, so many of them are so scared and so worried and feel like, I got in as a mistake. I don't belong here. And that gets in the way of learning. And so I started to think, okay, if I'm dealing with these stories, how do I start making space in my classroom to make it okay for students to reflect on, like, what are the stories that bring us to greater well-being, and what are the stories we tell ourselves that bring us to distraction and fear and disabling and crippleness and so that became that's sort of if I had to talk about my interest in mindfulness in a sentence, that would be it, is, that our brains tell stories all the time, but which ones are the ones that help us become the best version of ourselves, and which ones are the ones that kind of bring us down?
Yeah. Who was it that I was reading that said something about that? I don't remember now. Sorry, dog shaking their head and rattling the collar. about it being almost like we have these, I like that you're telling them stories, because that makes it, as an English person for me, and sorry about all those of you that are watching this that aren't, maybe your math or sciences, but I think we all understand what we're talking about. These tapes, right, that are recorded into the way we think we are, the way we think the world perceives us, the way we are supposed to respond, these shoulds, right? All this this narrative that's supposed to be our life. Right. And how is that really reality?
Well, and I think it's actually, I think another reason why it's so interesting to me is I think people who go into academia get rewarded for their thinking.
Right? Bo's joining us.
Oh,
just for a second. He jumped up. Sorry about that.
But by and large, it's for the quickness of our wit, or the way our way with words, or the way you can solve a problem, or the ability to understand some science issue. And so we are rewarded for our minds. And so I think we are the ones who often are more attached to our intellect than people who are less rewarded for their minds. And so I feel like the need for this kind of contemplative work for academics is especially acute. And I think, and that's where Eckhart Tolle writes about one of his favorite teachers in the university ended up taking his own life. And it made him realize that if intellect were enough, like if we could just think our way out of all these problems, if thought alone were enough, this guy would have done it. And I think that way about the writer David Foster Wallace and his beautiful graduation address, This is Water, which you may have listened to at some point. But it's contemplative in some ways, but it's very rooted in thought and sort of conscious choice. And I think there's this other space where you need to step back and be the observer and say, oh, there goes those stories again, or, there's your thinking mind, and why are you attached to that version of yourself? And this kind of observer that's not part of the train of thought, this sort of someone who's off the train of thought. And I feel like that's a necessary component. And I think especially for people in academia, that's a hard sell. Because we've been so rewarded for our intellectual. And that's where when Tolle says the quicker you are to label something, the quicker you are to name something, he says, I think if I can remember right, he says, cleverness may be gained, but wisdom is lost. And I'm like, that's me. Like, that's been my life. Like, I'm quick to name things. I'm a quick thinker. So the very things that I've been rewarded for, I've come to realize are also the things that cause me a lot of suffering and cause me to be disconnected from people. And so it's kind of just, and I feel like this moment, this COVID-19 moment, has taught me one lesson, that you can have two opposing feelings and beliefs about something at the same time, and they're both equally true. So I'm very grateful for my brain and all the thoughts it's allowed me to think. And I am also very aware that it's a source of many problems. Just like this moment is incredibly filled with suffering and pain and insecurity and fear. And then every day there's some unexpected moment I get to have with my 11-year-old because she's home and I'm home. And, and my dog is 15 and we don't know how much longer she'll be around, and we get to spend all our time with her. And so that one doesn't negate the other, right? That both can be true. And I think that that's been sort of my realization about contemplative things too, is that intellect is very important, but I think in the academy we've gotten too reliant on our thinking minds and not enough on body knowledge and intuitive sort of just awareness, kind of awareness practice in whatever form, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. I think the terms matter a lot less than this, that we need some balance to thinking.
I love that balance idea. Because isn't that, I love that Dr. Wayne Dyer, I know that,
Mm,
I use this a lot with my students and in my own life. And I think this is, I mean, I don't know if you would, it seems like this is where you're going with what you're talking about too, that, and, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this is that, that constant busyness, Dr. Wayne Dyer says, we're human beings, not
right.
human doings. And I uh, I know I'm speaking to you and whoever's listening on the audience here, is that we are in academia, especially, it's almost like we wear this medal on how many papers we have left to grade and how much work we have to do and how busy we are and how full our schedules are. And I know I'm guilty of it, and
Right.
trying.
And our students are too. I hear my students say that people will be like, well, I got 2 hours sleep last night because of it. And then someone will be like, well, I got 1 hour, that it's almost a competition, that if you then said, well, I really prioritized my health and got 8 hours sleep last night, that people would, that that's socially even not acceptable, that it's become kind of, to be kind of part of the social norm, you have to kind of humble brag about how little you're caring for yourself. And my students talk about that.
Boy, when you think of graduate school and stuff, I mean, it's all we did. It was like if you weren't being incredibly masochistic and
Right.
just, you know, sackcloth and ashes and, practically a mentality of putting yourself way below your work in every regard, it was like you weren't taking it seriously. So I get what students were doing. And I see that a lot I think that I had that tendency, honestly. I think that
Right.
tendency of being um, overly busy. And if my schedule's not full, then, oh my gosh, does that mean I'm not important? Or if I'm not doing valuable work? And,
Right.
and what does that mean if I'm not doing things,
Well,
which,
and I think that comes out of fear, and the fear that gets turned into a story. And that's where, Pema Chodron, she talks about, she uses the term shenpa, is just sort of that moment of getting hooked where you feel something that feels not quite right. And she said that in itself isn't the problem. That's the human condition, right? That's, you feel an unease or a discomfort. But then she said, and then we turn a story to it. And so that story becomes probably like an imposter syndrome. Well,
oh,
everyone's working, um, I'm a first generation college student. What am I doing in a academic role at a place like Boston College? Someday people are going to find me out, and this kind of feeling like you have to run faster and faster on the hamster wheel to kind of keep that story at bay. But we can never keep that story at bay. And the only way to do it is to sit with that story and be like, okay, that's a story. And that's just one story my mind tells. But running away from it just makes the story bigger and bigger. And so um,
kind
John
of like
McCrae,
Sisyphus. It reminds me of Sisyphus a little bit.
yeah, you can't push.
That we're just pushing that stone. We're just pushing that stone up, and every day we're pushing that stone. It's rolling back, pushing it. It's rolling back, and it's the same thing over and over. And it's almost like watching a rerun of this story, right? Of
Right.
this every day, the same exact thing. Well, how can we then, as mindful participants in our own experience, how can we step back and say it's okay to let the rock roll back down the hill without feeling like we have to push it up all the time? Or in other words, how can we,
Well, I think,
you know what I'm saying, right? You
yeah,
understand what I'm
yeah.
talking about.
First of all, it's interesting because I'm always better at answering. Like, I see this in my students all the time. And so, sort of, it's physician, it's easier to heal other people than to really fix ourselves, right? But my students, it often manifests in this strive for perfectionism. And
Mm,
we do a thought experiment, and I say, what would happen if you just let go of the gas pedal just a tiny bit. You know, some of those students who are so driven to the point of like total stress and, you know, working so hard that they're not working effectively. I said, what if you just, what would happen? Let's not even asking you, just think about it. What are you worried about? And they often say that I would do nothing, right? That it becomes, there's only two possible stories in that plot. You're either pushing that rock up the hill 24/7, or you're laying on the couch eating bonbons, and there's nothing in between. And I said, isn't there a lot of other choices in between those two extremes? And, you know, let's think about what that story could look like. And that's where, I mean, I very much see my contemplative work as a writing teacher. Like, how do we tell a new kind of story where we are still engaged in the world, but we don't have to martyr ourselves? You know, I went to 12 years of Catholic school. You know, that story is embedded deep. We're both women. That sort of story of serving and selflessness is embedded deep. So none of this goes away easily, but to catch myself when I'm feeling resentful because, oh, of course I'm the one having to do all this. And, you know, when I catch myself in those moments, to just notice and be like, okay, here I go again, you know. And so sometimes it's just noticing that you're telling that same story for the 1,000th time, and you just pause and smile and go, and just that act in itself takes away a little of the power of that story. It's like when you pull back the curtain from The Wizard of Oz and you see him as the wizard, it takes away his power. You don't need to do anything. I don't need to fix it. To just be like, oh, here I am, feeling like if I'm not doing this, I'm not, you know, here I am being a human doing and not a human being. Look, whatever term it is that works for you. I think for me, that's really useful. But also in the classroom, I think it's really useful to make I make kind of what are the stories we tell ourselves part of the curriculum in my writing classes from the very first day. It's the first assignment I give my students. I have them write a letter to themselves about a thought or a belief they have about themselves as a writer that they wish were different, that they would like to see changed. And
writing this down because this is so good.
Yeah, and I have an article that's coming out in John Duffy and Lois Agnew have a collection called After Plato, which is about ethics and writing, and I have a chapter called Mindful Ethics that talks a little bit about this. So it'll be out any day. But
congratulations.
So I have them write a letter to themselves about this thought, and they, you know, their thoughts are, they don't belong in college, the admissions committee made a mistake, or they're the first person in their college in their family to go to college, and can they carry all those expectations, that their learning disability makes them not as smart as their peers, or that their perfectionism makes it impossible to put a word down on paper. So they're very honest because it's the first day of class, and, you know, it's just this homework assignment. And so what I do is I create a class letter, and I can send you a copy if you want to see it, but based on I make 2 essays where I take a sentence from each student's paper, and one essay is all the horrible thoughts they have about themselves, about, face it, you will never succeed here, you know, coming here was a mistake. So I piece together one essay of all the worst kind of thoughts that they all feel, and then on the opposite page, they all have some really, somewhere in that letter, they say, but you know what? Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. You know, maybe I do belong here, and I should just listen. I can improve as a writer. Writing is a skill you can learn. And within these letters, there's so much wisdom at the same time that there's these horrible things. And so I write that letter too, write that essay where one sentence, and I've done this now for 3 years, and every year I can use one sentence from every student on both essays. And I give it to them on the third day of class. And we read it, the "Which wolf are you feeding" essay, and so the essay is called, "Which wolf are you going to feed in this class?" And so we talk about how everybody has these fears and these insecurities and these doubts and these, beliefs about what we can't be. And at the same time, I'm always impressed. There's usually nothing in the advice that they have. Like, it's everything I want them to learn in the whole class. It's about, if you keep revising, your writing will get better. Writing is a way of thinking, and writing is a way of connecting to people. And so they really know a lot already coming into the classroom, but they also have this. And so I start the class with that, talking about well, which wolf are you going to feed? And it allows us to talk about, when are we procrastinating? And, a lot of the things that get in the way of doing schoolwork, that people usually feel ashamed to talk about. Like, well, I stared at a blank page for 30 minutes and then started watching Netflix. And then okay, so, we talk about productive procrastinating. Like I said, did you enjoy that time? Was it relaxing time? No, I felt stressed because I should have been working. And, and I said, well, maybe next time just say, I'm taking 30 minutes to enjoy a TV show because I'm tired and I need to rest. And so when we have this story of procrastinating, we both don't get our work done and we don't rejuvenate. Our batteries don't recharge. That in itself becomes a disabling story.
Well, and don't you think that's applicable to those of us that work in the academy?
Yeah.
I mean, let's connect it back. Let's loop around, because I think that's a great lesson for us to take away from this, right? That it's okay, right? From what I hear you saying, if we're telling our students, hey, it's okay to take 30 minutes off, enjoy what you're doing, it's all right. Give yourself permission to do that. But yet we're, doing this to ourselves if we didn't get through all the things we needed to grade that night, or that, or we're just constantness like we do. But it's okay for us to do that too, right? Yeah. To keep our not only our mental space available, but also to keep our physical bodies healthy,
right.
And well. I mean, I've had so many people that I know, especially folks that are like social media with me. You were just talking about, because I'm always posting about my runs. Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Well, I've had quite a few people, oh, I wish I had that kind of time. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, we have the same amount of time.
Right.
We all have 24 hours in a day, right? And I think that mindfulness puts us in this connection with being able to, at least for me, I don't know if you found this too, Paula, because for me, I'm able to look at it and say what's valuable and what's important, and what can be done later, what will still be there, right? Later. I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm
not sure. And I think for me, the goal is to act rather than react. And I realize how much of my life has been reaction and the difference between reactivity, which is unconscious and quick and thoughtless, and responding, where you just pause and you kind of say, okay, what does this moment call for? And so it's kind of just taking a minute to slow down and to sort of say, what do I feel called to do in this moment? And to just be okay with whatever comes up and whatever that answer is, instead of, I have plenty of days where I don't think I think at all, like I'm just on autopilot and I'm just running. And so to just kind of slow down and I think Zoom has made that harder too. And especially I'm teaching a graduate course, we're just wrapping up, but the first time we were online, I drank in all the stress. Like I was checking in with each student and just, they're in the library closed, so a lot of their financial resources had been cut off. A lot of them were in precarious living situations with roommates they had found on Craigslist who were fine to share a space with, but not.
Sorry. I apologize, world. Sorry, Paula.
And then some with family members in the healthcare profession, and other people with, people who were sick. And I remember after that first day, I had just taken in all the stress, and I hadn't even processed it. And so really, like, thinking about how do I be present and hold space for those students and what's going on, but not feel like I have to just drink in all the stress of that. And, and that's taken practice. I'm still working on that, empathizing doesn't mean you have to kind of drink it all, soak it all in like a sponge, because there's so much suffering in this moment. And so self-care can feel really selfish.
Yeah.
And so how do you say, well, if I'm going to show up tomorrow, I can't show up as my best self if I haven't slept, or if I haven't moved my body, or if I haven't looked up at the sky, and that's time well spent.
Kind of an investment, really, right?
Yeah, like if I want to be able to show up for those students who are struggling and show up for myself, you've got to take some care in that. And that's a story I still struggle with. That feels selfish, and there's always something else, being a parent, I should be doing something with my daughter, or I should be doing a load of laundry, or I should be doing something. And so there's always something. Yeah. And so for me, and this I hope will change at a different stage in my life, but for me, I don't spend tons of hours sitting on a cushion because I don't have a lot of time. But for me, it really is like, okay, I'm washing these dishes, so I'm going to wash these dishes really mindfully and not be planning, to not be projecting forward or not be reflecting backwards about what went wrong in the class or what could I have done differently, that I'm just going to be here with these dishes, or I'm just going to cook, or I'm just going to listen to my daughter right now and not worry about what emails are coming in or other, that kind of monotasking right now is kind of my best contemplative practice, because it's something I have time for. It's things I need to do, but I feel like it's very easy to feel distracted and to be all over the place.
Well, anytime that ding goes off, right? You're in the middle of something, you're doing something online, and because everything is our screens right now, right? All this stuff that we're doing is just these screens, and it's so easy. I've started putting down morning email on my list of things to do: morning email, afternoon email, and I'm only checking my email twice a day.
Good for you. I'm going to write that down. I need to do that.
Morning email, and I check it off like I would anything else. And it's hard. Oh, it's hard not to, because I see my little thing show that I have on the tab. I see that I have emails, but I realized, I'm teaching classes, I'm doing things. So, it can wait. There's
Right.
things that can wait. We don't have to feel like we're juggling chainsaws all the time, and which is, I think, the way I felt when we first shifted everything online. I felt like I was just working 24/7. But from what I love that, because that what you said, the washing the dishes reminds me of Thich Nhat Hanh's story. When you wash the dishes, just wash the dishes.
Right.
When you do it, just do it,
And that's something I always bring into classes. I bring tangerines, the clementines. And the first week or two, I just bring them as a snack for the class. And then so we've had clementines, and then I say, okay, everybody take one. And then we do Thich Nhat Hanh's peeling of an orange kind of contemplative exercise. And then we write about what did they notice? How is this orange different than all the other oranges that they had earlier in previous weeks? And So how is just slowing down, and like, what did you notice about eating an orange that you never noticed before? And what did you think about? And how, because in some ways it really, I think, lends itself to teaching writing. So, how, isn't that what a writer is? To notice something about the mundane that people hadn't noticed before, that's a skill we want to cultivate in our students, that active noticing. But if you're flying down the freeway at 100 miles an hour, it's very hard to notice anything. And so how do you just slow down just for a minute and focus on that orange? And
Boy, Paula, that's so good, because and of course, I live in this world and I live in academia. I know that there are moments in our lives that we are rushing. We have to rush. We have deadlines. We have things. We've got to get from here to there. And I'm not saying that, oh, well, we're just going to turn into these sloth-like creatures that, but I think even recognizing that there are moments where we are needing to multitask is
right.
a practice of mindfulness. It's understanding that right now is requiring me to do 20 things at one time. And I'm recognizing that, and it's okay. I'm not going to judge it. I don't need to should on myself about it. That's part of our practice, right? I mean, anybody could be a mindfulness master if we're in a retreat center somewhere, and that's all we're doing is focusing on this moment, walking slowly, being very contemplative. We could all do it then, right? It's being in the real world. I
probably would have trouble then too.
Yeah, I know. And we all still would have, yeah, exactly. I would have trouble too with this, the monkey mind and, all the things, the shoulding, the stories that we tell ourselves and the things that we should be doing and all the things.
Yeah, but I think you're right that it's about intentionality, and it's not about that. It's kind of, and again, I because I teach writing, I think I bring things back to writing. Sometimes in a piece of writing, you need to cover a lot of territory very quickly, right? You can cover, essay and then other moments, the essay needs to really slow down and linger on a specific moment and really evoke every sensory detail of that moment. And then it might speed up, and that you don't want one essay that moves along at the same rate of speed the whole time. Well, it's kind of like with life, some parts of the day where you might need to be doing 10 things at once to get through that moment of the day. But then how do you slow that down and be like, whew, how am I? Check in with yourself, check in.
Mm-hmm.
What do I need now? And to
turn my head around.
I mean, it's so easy to forget that we're bodies, that our mind can maybe multitask, but what toll is that taking on our body? What toll is just sitting at a screen taking on our body? And what's toll is, all these kind of things. And so honoring, and that there's wisdom that our body has that our mind doesn't have, and that there's wisdom that our kind of awareness self has, that's kind of, whether it's intuitive or it's an inkling, whatever terms you want to have, a spirit or hunch or whatever term, that there's some knowledge there that our thinking mind doesn't have. And to make space for all of those is kind of, to me, the challenge, which I do badly more often than I do well, but that's kind of
high fives, me too. Yeah. Or no, wrong hand. I don't know. What are we doing?
Yeah. But then and also, and that's where I think cultivating a sense of self, sense of humor, like not taking ourselves too seriously. And so being like, well, like I'm a clumsy person, and for a long time that, like, I spill things, like every cup I have has to have a lid on it because I spill everywhere and on everything. And for a lot of my life, I let that really be a source of shame, like I'm clumsy, that makes me bad. And then when my daughter was in kindergarten, she made me a Mother's Day thing that said, like, what makes your mother special? And she wrote that I was clumsy.
Oh, no.
And at first I was very defensive, and I was like, what? I'm not that clumsy. And she said, you are, but that's what makes you special. And she meant it very open-heartedly and sweetly. And it allowed me to be like, well, yeah, I actually am clumsy. And that's okay. You know, like I'm sort of the absent-minded professor, you know, embodied, and to laugh at that rather than to be you know, it's just that shift. Instead of being ashamed of it, to see it as, yeah, okay, and
And
you
that's
know, that's not
okay.
a, and that's okay.
And that's and that's okay. And it's I have a t-shirt and I love it. It says, "It is what it is, but it will become what you make it."
Oh, I love that. Oh, I
Right?
love
It
that.
is what it is, but it will become what you make it. And I think, isn't that isn't that true? And it's just like your story about being clumsy. It's like, well, it is what it is. And the way you take it and the way you spin it and how we do with what we do
Mhm.
is where that goes.
Yeah.
So with that, it is what it is, but it will become what it be. What if you could tell the faculty and staff and administrators at Green River College maybe a couple things of why their lives will be better by employing some contemplative or mindfulness practices, what would you tell them? I'm putting you on the spot here. Friends,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well,
So I'm putting her
I
on the
mean, I
spot.
think they have to decide for themselves if if they are or not. And for me, and I'll send you, maybe you can put, but
Yeah, I can put it in
what
my
I
research
like is
page.
the contemplative mind in higher education has this tree of contemplative practice. And what I like is it has many different things, because contemplative, like I'm not a great meditator personally. I aspire to be, and I spend a little bit of time sitting every day, but it looks more like 5 minutes than 20 minutes. And some days I don't do it at all. And but I have been keeping a journal every day since we've been, my daughter and I sit and write, we each have a journal and we sit and write together every night. And so that has become kind of a contemplative practice. And so I think the first thing I would say is find what works for each person. That there's a contemplative practice. Coloring in a mandala is very, I think, stress relieving for me, and really useful. And so I think the one thing is, I would encourage people to see a variety of contemplative practices and figure out what works for them. Like maybe it's a walk in nature, you know, every day or something so that would be the first thing, is to not have a narrow idea of what contemplative practice looks like. And then I think, you know, sort of see for yourself what that does. And I remember in this class, I teach on mindful storytelling, which is an elective, so it really is just about all the things we've been talking about. And we all went and took a mindful walk around campus, and then kind of came back. And I just found myself unwittingly sort of having this kind of mantra where this is it, this is life. Right now, this is life. And it was like the most memorable and meaningful walk, because I was so every step, I can remember every step of that walk, because every moment I was like, yes, this is life. Like, and I feel like as faculty and as busy people, we miss so much of our life because we're either worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or thinking about what happened yesterday, and we're missing what's right here in front of us. And so I think, to me, the rituals of contemplative work and looking down that road, especially right now as we're quarantined, it's scary. It's really scary. I don't want a crystal ball. If someone said, do you want to look 2 years into the future? I would say, no, thank you. So it's scary, and I'm a worrier. I'm a very anxious person. And so for me, sort of just staying in this moment is part of what helps keep me from not spiraling into too much worry. And so I think there's a real richness. We only experience life in the present, but half the time we're living in the forward or the back. And so I think
Projection and rumination.
so I think that would be my advice, is to try that. And you know, and that doesn't mean we don't plan. Like, you can have a moment where you say, well, this moment is planning for now, but to do that with intentionality and mindfulness, instead of while you're washing the dishes worrying about, oh man, I didn't get enough done today. Why didn't I get enough done today? I've got to do more tomorrow, but I don't have a clear plan for that. What should I be doing? Like that kind of ruminating. I still do it. I won't lie. I still do a lot of that, and I still am scatterbrained. And I think I've been attracted to mindfulness because I need it so much, not because I'm naturally inclined at being good at it.
You know, and I think that's so genuine and authentic. And I appreciate that because, you know, I'm trying to share that authenticity, you know, with my campus community. I mean, I'm a goofball.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, I'm a ham, you know, I'm not like, I don't walk around in robes like I'm this, you know, sage wisdom of, you know, mindful practices and all that. It's who I am. And coming, and I appreciate what you're saying because I'm not you know, I'm not perfect. I'm not always practicing. I'm not, there's times where I shit on myself. How do you think I know what it is? You know what I mean? I'm a queen crown. Right. But I think that as we progress and we learn these things and we rewrite some of those stories and we start finding ways where we can not just settle on the way that it was and the way we've always been, but maybe seeing some things that we can do to improve our quality of life and improve our experience, improve our contact and our commitment to the careers that we've chosen and to our students and to our families and utilize things that are going to enrich us and make that moment, the moments of our lives matter more.
Yeah. Well, and I think my last pitch I'll make, because I know you need to run, but
yeah, speaking of mindfulness and running around and all the things, I've got office hours scheduled during the same time, but we're doing all right.
But I think in thinking about relationships with students, and I think when you really inhabit, you know, I think the first writing I did about mindfulness and teaching is I was asked, like, what does it mean to be a responsive teacher? It was an essay collection, and I was asked that question through part of the Watson. And my first answer was responding to the students who are actually in the room and not the students you had last semester or the semester before or the semester before. Because you plan a syllabus before you've even met the students. There's something very unmindful about the way we schedule our curriculum. And so then how do you show up without all your preconceptions, without all your ideas of who these students are and what they need and what they think, and how do you be really present to learn who those students really are and have a genuine relationship? And I think it's hard, but I think the more, at least for me, the more I work on doing that, the more real a connection I make with students. That doesn't mean I succeed all the time with every student, but to me, that's work that's really meaningful, you know, is to realize, you know, that for a long time, I was teaching ghosts. I was teaching the students, I was trying to teach these kids what my students the previous semester had needed. Like, oh, they needed a lot of work on that. So I'm building that a lot into this class, and come hell or high water, I'm going to teach my syllabus. You know, that there's something inherently backward looking about syllabus planning. And so how do you show up for the students who are there and not sort of quickly judge them and label them, and to not be like, oh, this is a student athlete, I know what that means, or oh, this is a kid coming in late every day, I know what that means, but to become curious, you know, so to notice things and to respond with curiosity rather than labeling or judging or telling a story, to realize I don't know enough to tell a story. I think that's been kind of my greatest revelation, is how quickly I could spin a whole story of, oh, this is who this student is, and this is what they need, and realizing based on nothing. And that was a habit that I'm still working on, but trying to really to instead allow students to be a mystery, to be a question that I remain curious about and in dialogue with, rather than sort of diagnosing them so I can write my prescription and then send them on their way.
It's like them fitting into our preconceived bias or, just from our experiences, and I think I'm guilty of that for sure, and I think for me, it keeps coming back to that we're human beings, not human doings. And that applies to our students too, right?
Right.
That they're that individual, that holistic way of teaching, the holistic way of being. But, we can't look at our students that way unless we're looking at ourselves that way.
Right.
So if we can be in that space, and we're going to have better days than others, our best is going to be varied, right? And to give ourselves permission to be that way, and to also understand our students will be as well, right?
Right.
Boy, Paula, I wish we could keep going. I am so sorry that our time is coming to an end. You have been.
You have students waiting for you.
Pardon me?
You have students waiting for you, probably.
I know, I do. I actually do have students waiting for me, but they know I've got this meeting today, and I just appreciate you spending the time with us today. Well, with me, and eventually with everyone else. And I just thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your experience. Thank you. And oh my goodness, I hope we'll have to do this again soon.
Yes, I would love that. And we don't even have to record it. We can just talk.
We could just talk. I would love that. That would be so much fun. Let's do it. Let's
thank you, Emily. You make me feel so special. So
you are, and you're a gift, and I'm honored to know you. So thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of your semester. If I don't talk to you,
and stay safe and well, everyone. That's
go enjoy your beautiful daughter and your family.
Thank you.
I'll see you later, Paula. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.